Freytag's pyramid is a 5-part map of dramatic structure. Understanding its 5 steps can give you a clearer sense of what makes a strong, compelling story. Most stories follow a straightforward pattern known as Freytag's pyramid. Storytelling is an ancient tradition, and while creative writing spans numerous genres and languages, the essential formula for storytelling remains largely unchanged. Whether you're crafting short stories, screenplays, non-fiction, or narrative poetry, the majority of stories follow a fairly simple pattern known as Freytag's pyramid. Gustav Freytag, the 19th-century German novelist, playwright, and literary theorist, developed this narrative pyramid, describing a structure that fiction writers have used for millennia. Freytag's pyramid outlines the 5 key stages of a story, providing a conceptual framework for crafting a story from beginning to end. These stages are Exposition, Rising Action, Climax, Falling Action, Resolution. Understanding these stages can give you a clear roadmap for writing compelling stories across various genres and formats. The original pyramid drawn by Freytag did not include the flat lines at the base of the drawing. These were added later by other narrative theorists, yet the concept itself is still credited to Freytag, whether positively or negatively. Additionally, it's important to recognize that Freytag's pyramid is most relevant to stories from the Western tradition. While the pattern of increasing and decreasing tension is not unique to Western stories, there are numerous variations in story structure found both in Western literature and across global storytelling traditions. Let's dive into each of the 5 stages of Freytag's pyramid and see what happens in this classic story structure. Exposition. Every story has to start somewhere, and according to Freytag's pyramid, it starts with the exposition. This stage primarily introduces the major elements of the story, the setting, characters, and style. The writer's main goal during the exposition is to build the world in which the story's conflict will unfold. The length of your exposition will depend on the complexity of your story's conflict, the extent of the world being created, and your personal writing style. For instance, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings is rich with backstory and exposition, often spanning chapters of pure world building. In contrast, C.S. Lewis offers very little exposition in the Chronicles of Narnia series, blending conflict with world building from the start. Whether your exposition spans 50 pages or just a sentence, use this part of your story to captivate your readers. Make your fictional world as vivid and real as the one we live in. Your exposition should end with the inciting incident, the event that triggers the main conflict of your story. Rising action. The rising action delves into the story's conflict leading up to its climax. During this phase, things often get worse for the characters, bad decisions are made, the antagonist causes harm, new characters complicate matters, and so on. For many stories, the rising action occupies the most pages. It explores the conflict in depth, introducing complications and revealing key pieces of backstory. As the tension builds, readers learn more about the characters' motives, the story's world, and the themes being explored. It's also a good time to foreshadow the upcoming climax. Looking back at the rising action, it should be clear how each plot point connects to the story's climax and its aftermath. But first, let's discuss the climax. Every part of your story is crucial, but if there's one part where you really want to nail it, it's the climax. This is where the story's conflict reaches its peak, and we discover the fate of the main characters. Many writers approach the climax believing it needs to be short, fast-paced, and action-packed. While some stories may benefit from this style of climax, there's no one-size-fits-all formula. Think of the climax as the pivotal point in your story, the moment when the central conflict is addressed in a way that can't be reversed. Whether your climax is a single scene or spans several chapters is entirely up to you. Remember, the climax isn't just about resolving the plot, it's also about exploring the story's themes and ideas. This is your chance to reflect on the concepts that drive your narrative, leaving the reader with a lasting emotional impression. Note that in plays, the climax typically occurs in the middle act, but not all theatrical productions adhere strictly to this structure. Falling action. In the falling action, the writer explores what happens after the climax. Are there new conflicts that arise as a result of the climax? How does the climax reflect on the story's central themes? And how do the characters respond to the irreversible changes brought about by the climax? Writing the falling action is often the most challenging part. It's where the writer starts to wrap up loose ends from the main conflict, delves into broader themes and concepts, and moves the story towards some resolution while still focusing on the aftermath of the climax. If the rising action took the story away from its normal, the falling action represents a return to a new normal, albeit in a dramatically different way. But the story still needs to keep the reader engaged. As you write the falling action, expand on the world of your story, unravel its mysteries, and highlight what makes your story compelling. Resolution, or denouement. How do you end a story? One of the most challenging aspects of writing is deciding where the narrative should conclude. In theory, a story could go on indefinitely, especially after a life-altering climax or in a fantastical world. The resolution of a story involves tying up the loose ends from the climax and falling action. Sometimes, this means following the aftermath to a chilling conclusion. The protagonist may die, the antagonist might escape, or a fatal mistake could have fatal consequences. Other times, the resolution ends on a lighter note. Perhaps the protagonist learns from their mistakes, begins a new chapter in life, or reconciles with whatever sparked the conflict. Use the resolution to further explore the story's themes and leave the reader with something to ponder after they've finished reading. Some writers also use the term denouement when discussing the resolution. Denouement refers to the final event that ties up the story's loose ends, often found in the story's epilogue or closing scene. Let's now use Freytag's pyramid to understand the structure of Shakespeare's Macbeth. The exposition of Macbeth introduces the setting, characters, and the initial situation. We learn about Scotland in the midst of war, where Macbeth is a loyal general. Macbeth encounters the three witches who prophesy his future as king. Lady Macbeth learns about the prophecy and urges Macbeth to take action. The rising action develops the central conflict and builds tension towards the climax. Macbeth's ambition is ignited by the prophecy, leading him to consider murder. Macbeth kills King Duncan and becomes king himself. Macbeth's guilt and paranoia grow as he commits more murders to secure his throne. Macduff becomes suspicious of Macbeth and flees to England. The climax is the turning point of the play, where the central conflict reaches its highest point. Macbeth seeks out the witches again, who deliver ambiguous prophecies that lead to his downfall. Macduff returns with an army to overthrow Macbeth. Macbeth confronts Macduff in battle and learns that Macduff was not born of woman in the traditional sense. Macbeth is killed by Macduff, marking the climax of the play. The falling action explores the consequences of the climax and begins to resolve the story. Malcolm is declared king, restoring order to Scotland. Macduff mourns the death of his family and reflects on the cost of Macbeth's tyranny. Order is restored, and the country begins to heal from Macbeth's reign of terror. The resolution concludes the story and ties up loose ends. Malcolm declares peace and invites everyone to his coronation. The rightful order is restored to Scotland, and the country looks forward to a brighter future. The play ends with a sense of closure and justice.